believe that. I am not one of those people. I don't think that this had anything to do with the lipstick murders, for the simple fact that William George Herons confessed and was convicted of 3 murders in 1946. It was the same time frame, and really no other details about these murders are the same. Another option was that it was connected to the Cleveland torso murders. What do you think?
No.
No, right?
No.
I disagree with the connection as well. I mean, there are a few similarities. The bodies being drained of blood. That was one huge thing about the murder, was that there was no blood left at all at the crime scene. The body was scrubbed, but I mean, just not enough similarities at all.
I agree. I think they were completely different things.
Yeah. Yep, me too. Cecil Hotel connection. So we kind of brought this up last week as a teaser of maybe the connection between the Cecil Hotel and Betty having stayed there at some point. There is no concrete evidence that says that she stayed there in the days leading up. The Biltmore Hotel was actually where Red had said that he had dropped her off. Was it Red? I swear it was Red. Maybe I need to look back. Yeah, Red. Okay. So that's where he had said he had dropped her off, was the Biltmore Hotel. But the Cecil Hotel was a pretty hopping place around that time. And so, yes, it's likely that she had gone there at some point, that she had been there. They think, yes, that's extremely likely. But as far as the days leading up to her murder, that's not really anything concrete. Okay, so next option is Leslie Dillon. He was a 27-year-old bellhop. He also was a writer and a mortician's assistant. So he's quite the resume.
Yeah, he's got it all.
A man of all trades. So he knew a lot of details about the murder, which is basically what kind of got him into trouble. So he voluntarily writes a letter to one of the LAPD psychiatrists asking more details about the case. And he's wanting to hear the theories of this psychiatrist. And he's claiming that he just wants to know more because he has just an interest, a genuine interest, nice wholesome interest in sadism and sexual psychopaths. So he wants to write a book because he's a writer. And so he's hoping to write a book, and he would like to hear some of the theories of this psychiatrist. So it seems, innocent enough, right?
Yeah.
He just, your natural interest in sadism. He soon becomes a suspect because he knows a lot about the crime. It ends up being pretty apparent that he knows more than he should. But after he becomes a suspect, he kind of, due to the corruption, LAPD, one officer lets him go. So nobody really knows if he knew more or not than he really should have. But he did have time, however, to throw his friend Jeff Connors right under the bus and say, I only know so much because my friend Jeff is the killer. He actually committed the crimes. That's why I know this many details. And if it weren't for him, I wouldn't know this much. And so Jeff Connors is the guy that committed this murder. So the LAPD psychiatrist that was actually corresponding with Leslie Dillon believes that Jeff Connors never existed. He thinks that it was somebody that he made up as a fictional character to take on the blame, and he kind of was a little bit suspicious a little bit of this guy. So with good reason. I mean, he maybe knew a little bit more than he should have, but at this time, who's to say that the same LAPD that's corrupt isn't sharing more details with people than they should be?
Right.
And maybe that's how people are coming to know all of these details. So
Yeah.
that's more my theory, that Leslie probably wasn't the guy, but that he maybe knew somebody in the LAPD or knew someone who knew someone, and he got a hold of some details that way. So, last but not least, I saved the best for last. We are going to talk about George Hodel. Okay? Have you ever heard this name, George Hodel? He is not a great guy. I listened to this podcast, Root of Evil podcast, and the only reason that I listened to this podcast was to learn more about the Black Dahlia murders. It was just under the complete understanding that I was going to learn more about this. I got that and so much more about George Hodel. So this is a fascinating story. Super dark, super twisted. Guys, I'm not getting paid to say this, but Root of Evil podcast, holy cow. If you have a minute, check this out. It's insane, and you will not be sorry. You're not going to waste your time. It's crazy. So George Hodel is described as a genius and a musical prodigy. So as a kid, he hates his mother, but she is pushing him constantly because she wants him to be a pianist. Okay? So he hates playing the piano. He wants to go play ball like the other kids, and she's not having it because she wants a pianist and she doesn't want him to hurt his hands, because then his career as a famous pianist is going to be ruined.
That's right. Piano is life.
Piano is life to her. So she dies. And guess what happens? Piano hobby?
Gone. He went
Gone.
and plays ball.
Out the door. He probably went and played some football the day she died. I don't know. But he was not having this. He's not into piano. But he was described to be like completely brilliant in the musical realm. So odd. He just didn't love it. He is also, like I said, a complete and total genius. So genius is considered having an IQ of 140 or more. This kid in high school got a 186.
So he's pretty smart.
He's reasonably smart. He would be passing your calculus classes like a champ right now, or your trigonometry, I guess. Huh? So he attends Caltech at age 15.
Oh, dang. This kid's for real.
He's for real. He is a genius. So at the prime young age that he attends Caltech, he ends up having an affair with one of his professor's wives. So you don't want to do that ever.
Yeah.
It's a bad idea.
At 15.
At 15-ish, yeah, bad idea. So she ends up pregnant from this little affair. So he follows her. She goes back because her husband wants nothing to do with her, especially in the 40s. This is a bad deal. Quite the scandal. He kicks her out. She goes back to, I don't remember where, but to be with her family, to a different state back east. And George follows her. He's dead set. He's in love. He's just young. This is a first love for him, and he's all about it. He goes back and he wants to raise this baby with her, and she basically just laughs in his face and tells him to go away, and she never wants to see him again. She ends up naming this child Folly because it was such a huge folly that they had this affair, and basically saying that the kid was a mistake and the whole affair was a mistake. Okay, so poor George puts his tail back between his legs, tucks it right in, and just heads back to California. When he gets back to California, Caltech is not having it, and he's expelled from there. So that will get you kicked out of college, apparently, to have an affair with the professor's wife. So I don't know about 2021, but 1940s, they were not having it. So George ends up being quite the stud in his later life. He
I'd say he was a stud at 15.
Actually,
his professor's wife,
yeah, one would say.
One would say.
So point well made. He later ends up being, and I learned so much about venereal disease. So who knew? He later ends up being the VD control officer for LA County Health Department. Okay, and that's a big deal. You wouldn't think that's a big deal, but it's a big deal. So, one thing I learned was that venereal disease was actually the number one health issue for soldiers in World War I. So, more soldiers missed time from battle or time from their action in war due to syphilis and gonorrhea than actual injuries or anything or illness like that from the war. So sexually transmitted diseases were a huge thing during World War I. So they bring George on, and he is the venereal disease control officer. Okay, and being in LA County, he's got a lot to deal with. Okay, so George, like I said, was not the greatest guy. So he was doing some things that were a little bit wrong as during his time. And he was pretty prestigious. I mean, it was a prestigious job. It doesn't sound like it to be like dealing with sexually transmitted diseases all the time. But this position that he held, he was kind of a big deal at the time. So he knows a lot of celebrities. He knows a lot of people that are, big in LA. And he's doing probably a lot of things that are like secret deals, okay? He also ends up doing illegal abortions, like we talked about with our first suspect. But George was also deliberately misdiagnosing some patients just in order to get a little bit of extra income. So people would come in and he would say, yep, you've got syphilis or you've got this bad case, and end up getting a little bit of extra money for it, treating them for it. No harm done, right? I mean,
you gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do what you gotta do, I guess, to scam people out of their money. So one lady ends up going to get a second opinion from a second doctor. She realizes that George has actually scammed her, and she writes a letter to Ruth Spalding, George's secretary. And George's secretary basically knows all of George's secrets. She knows that he's doing these illegal abortions. She knows that he's scamming people out of money now because she's gotten this letter. And so she threatens George and says that she's going to go to the authorities. They had a little romantic relationship at one time, and they had cut it off. It sounded like George had mostly cut it off with her. But he says, no, please don't do this. I want to get back together. I just want to talk to you. So I want to go to your apartment. So that night he makes a plan to go and talk to Ruth at her apartment. So no harm. She thinks, okay, he's going to come over and talk, and who knows what will happen. Who knows if she was really interested in being back with this guy, or she just wanted to hear what he had to say, or who knows. But so that is the last night that anybody ever sees Ruth alive. So Ruth actually that night dies of an overdose. And the story about that is in the Root of Evil podcast, and it's crazy. Bananas, that story. So he's actually at the apartment at the time, and he calls his wife, and he tells her to come over. So she comes over to Ruth's house, and there are all the documents that Ruth had against him, all the proof showing of the slimy, scummy things that he's doing to people. And he tells his wife, take these and destroy them. And she asks what has happened to Ruth, what's going on with her. And he said, she's fine. She just took too much of something. She's having an overdose. She'll be fine. Don't worry about her. So ends up that Ruth dies that night. Okay, so time goes on. He ends up being a pretty big suspect in the whole deal, rightfully so.
Yeah, I was about to say, as he should.
As he should be. He also has done surgeries. He also has been through medical school. He also knows how to do the procedure that was done to Betty. And so he also has all of that knowledge as the first suspect that we talked about, right? So yeah, he's like the perfect